The battlefield had finally gone quiet. Hours earlier, thousands of men had charged through the mud beneath machine gun fire. Now, only the wind remained. Broken rifles lay buried in the earth. Barbed wire twisted across the craters like rusted claws. And scattered across no man's land were the bodies of soldiers who would never return home. But one of them was still alive, hidden inside a shell crater between two enemy trench lines. A wounded soldier slowly opened his eyes. Mud covered his face. Blood soaked through his uniform. His ears rang from the explosion that had thrown him into the crater hours earlier. The attack had failed. When the whistles blew that morning, thousands of soldiers climbed from the trenches and charged across open ground. They never stood a chance. Machine guns tore through the advancing lines within seconds. Artillery shells ripped the battlefield apart. The soldier remembered running through smoke, then a blinding explosion. After that, nothing. Now night had fallen, and he realized the horrifying truth. He was trapped. His own trench line was too far behind him. The enemy trenches were only yards ahead. If he moved during daylight, snipers would kill him instantly. Then he heard movement nearby, scratching. Huge trench rats crawled across the bodies surrounding the crater. Somewhere in the darkness, wounded soldiers cried for help. Others screamed in pain. One by one, their voices faded into silence. The soldier stayed perfectly still inside the crater. Cold rainwater soaked through his uniform. Every few minutes, flares lit the battlefield like daylight. And each time, he believed someone would finally see him. Morning finally arrived, and with it, the full horror of no man's land. The soldier slowly lifted his head above the crater. Smoke drifted across the battlefield. Broken trees stretched from the mud like black skeletons. Bodies covered the ground in every direction. Some were barely recognizable anymore. Others still clutched their rifles. The battlefield looked frozen in time, but the danger had only begun. Enemy trenches sat only yards ahead. He could hear soldiers talking in the distance, metal clanging, boots moving through the trench lines. If anyone spotted movement inside the crater, he would be killed instantly. The soldier dropped back into the mud and stayed completely still. Hours passed. The sun rose higher. Flies swarmed around the bodies surrounding him. The smell became unbearable. Rotting flesh mixed with wet earth and smoke. By midday, thirst began to consume him. His canteen was gone. His lips cracked from dehydration. Every breath felt dry and painful. He forced himself to move. Slowly, carefully, he crawled across the crater toward a dead soldier nearby. Every movement felt impossibly loud. Mud dragged against his uniform. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. The dead soldier's body had partially sunk into the earth. The soldier reached trembling hands toward the canteen still hanging from the corpse. Empty. He searched again. Pockets, bags, anything. Finally, he found a small piece of stale bread wrapped inside a soaked cloth. It was filthy, but he ate it anyway. Then suddenly, gunfire cracked across the battlefield. Bullets slammed into the mud nearby. The soldier froze instantly. Someone had seen movement. He pressed himself beneath the bodies and waited. More shots echoed overhead. Mud sprayed across his face. Then silence returned once again. For the rest of the day, he did not move. As darkness slowly returned, the temperature dropped again. The wounded soldier curled deeper into the crater. Cold rain began falling across no man's land. And somewhere in the distance, artillery started firing once more. The second night was worse. Rain poured across no man's land without stopping. Water slowly filled the crater around the wounded soldier. Mud swallowed his boots. His uniform became heavier with every passing hour. The freezing cold shook his entire body. Somewhere beyond the darkness, artillery thundered again. The ground trembled beneath him. Bright explosions flashed across the horizon. Each blast lit the battlefield for only a second. But it was enough. Enough to reveal the endless bodies scattered through the mud. Enough to remind him he was completely alone. The soldier tried not to sleep. Every sound terrified him. Rats moved constantly through the crater. Sometimes they crawled across his legs while he stayed perfectly still. Other times, he heard footsteps. Enemy patrols. Their voices drifted through the darkness nearby. The soldier lowered himself deeper into the mud and barely breathed. A flashlight beam swept slowly across no man's land, closer and closer. Then finally, the voices disappeared into the distance. The soldier survived another night, but his condition grew worse. His wounded leg had become infected. Fever burned through his body. His hands trembled constantly, and hunger slowly began destroying his strength. By the third day, he could barely stand. Still, he forced himself to search the battlefield again. He crawled from corpse to corpse looking for water. Some canteens were shattered by bullets. Others contained only mud. Finally, He found rainwater pooled inside a soldier's helmet. It tasted like dirt and blood, but he drank every drop. Hours later, the silence suddenly ended. Whistles echoed from the trenches. Then came the gunfire. Another attack had begun. Machine guns exploded across the battlefield. Soldiers charged through the smoke once again. The wounded soldier pressed himself flat into the crater as bullets ripped through the mud around him. Men screamed nearby. Artillery shells slammed into the earth. One explosion struck so close that dirt buried half his body. For several terrifying seconds, he could not breathe. Then he clawed his way back to the surface. The battlefield had become hell again, and trapped between two armies, the wounded soldier realized something horrifying. Nobody was coming to save him. Days passed, then weeks. The wounded soldier stopped counting time. The battlefield never truly became quiet anymore. Even during silence, he could still hear distant artillery echoing across the horizon. His world had shrunk to the crater. Mud, cold, fear, and survival. His beard had begun to grow across his face. His uniform rotted against his skin. Every movement sent pain through his wounded leg. At night, fever dreams consumed him. Sometimes he imagined he was home again. Warm fire, clean clothes, voices of family far away from the war. Then explosions would drag him back to reality, back to the mud, back to no man's land. The soldier had learned how to survive. During daylight, he barely moved at all. He stayed hidden beneath bodies and debris inside the crater. At night, he searched the battlefield for supplies. Dead soldiers became his only chance to stay alive. Bread, water, blankets, anything. One evening, thick fog rolled across the battlefield. For the first time in days, visibility disappeared completely. The soldier realized this might be his only chance to move farther across no man's land unnoticed. Slowly, he crawled from the crater. His entire body trembled with exhaustion. Mud pulled at his boots. The fog swallowed everything around him. He could barely see a few feet ahead. Then suddenly, voices emerged nearby. Enemy soldiers. The wounded soldier froze instantly beside a corpse half buried in the mud. Flashlights moved through the fog, closer and closer. The patrol was collecting bodies from the battlefield. The soldier lowered his face into the mud and stayed perfectly still. Boots stopped only feet away. One flashlight beam passed directly across his body. For several horrifying seconds, he believed they had found him. But the patrol moved on. The voices slowly disappeared into the darkness. The soldier remained frozen long after they were gone. His heart pounded so violently he thought they might hear it. Then finally, he crawled back toward the crater. Still alive, still trapped, still alone. By now, he no longer wondered when rescue would come. Instead, he wondered how much longer his body could survive the battlefield. By the 40th day, the wounded soldier had become something unrecognizable. His body was skeletal beneath the mud-covered uniform. His beard had grown thick across his face. His hands shook constantly from fever and exhaustion. And still, the war continued around him. Artillery thundered day and night. Machine guns rattled across the trenches. The battlefield never stopped feeding itself with more bodies. But the soldier barely noticed anymore. Survival had become instinct. Nothing else mattered. Then one morning, the silence suddenly ended. Whistles screamed across the trenches once again. Another major attack had begun. The earth trembled beneath massive artillery fire. Shells exploded across no man's land. Smoke swallowed the battlefield. Thousands of soldiers climbed from the trenches and charged forward through the mud. The wounded soldier watched from inside the crater as men rushed past him on both sides. Some screamed. Some vanished instantly beneath explosions. Others collapsed into the same mud where he had survived for weeks. The battlefield had become chaos again. Then suddenly, someone saw him. A young soldier running through the smoke stopped in shock. At first, he thought the figure inside the crater was a corpse. Then the wounded soldier slowly raised one trembling hand. The young soldier shouted for help. Several men rushed toward the crater under heavy gunfire. The wounded soldier tried to stand, but his body collapsed instantly. Strong hands grabbed his arms, dragged him through the mud, pulled him away from the crater that had become his prison. Bullets snapped overhead as the rescue team carried him back toward friendly trenches. The soldier drifted in and out of consciousness. For the first time in 40 days, he heard voices that were not dying. For the first time in 40 days, someone touched him without violence. And for the first time in 40 days, he no longer felt alone. When the soldiers finally reached the trench line, medics stared in disbelief. The wounded man barely looked human anymore. His skin was pale from sickness. His wounds were infected. His body weighed almost nothing, but somehow, he was alive. Against every possible chance, he had survived no man's land. Many soldiers later called stories like his impossible. Some refused to believe them entirely, but the horrors of World War I created survivors who lived through things almost impossible to imagine. Because in no man's land, death was everywhere. And sometimes, survival became its own kind of nightmare. Somewhere beneath the fields of Europe, the scars of no man's land still remain, silent reminders of the men who were left trapped between two armies.